welcome to only the second ever C-Suite Leadership Mixer. For those who are tuned in and don't know me, my name is Dean Carroll and I'm one of the co-founders of C-Suite, which is a new startup aiming to provide a lifetime learning platform for executives. Our Mixer series of virtual events will be a taster for our MVP app, which we will launch in Q4 of this year. So in the meantime, you can get lots more information on our website, which is csuite.sg, and C-Suite has a hyphen, by the way. If you like what you see there, please do follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to get updates about what we have coming up. So enough of the spruik, back to the matter in hand. Today it's our pleasure to host Hari V Krishnan as our Mixer guest. Hari himself is a veteran C-level executive with more than 20 years of experience across the Asia-Pacific region and the United States. He is passionate about the positive role responsible technologists can play in our lives. Imagine that. And at Property Guru, where he has worked as CEO since 2016, Hari leads a team of more than 1,300 gurus, as the firm's employees are called. He is also a government advisor and has previously worked for industry-leading firms such as LinkedIn, Yahoo, and Cisco. He recently helped Property Guru to raise an additional $300 million in addition to all the other money they've raised in the years gone by. And Hari has an MBA from the prestigious INSEAD Business School. He speaks English, French, Hindi, and Tamil. Impressive stuff indeed. I feel very inadequate now. So just a quick note to say that you can submit your questions to Hari via the Q&A icon, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can today. Feel free to remain anonymous or leave your name and company there too, if you'd like to be name checked. In addition to that, you can obviously comment and talk to each other in the chat box, but we would ask that you remain respectful and professional when doing so. So thank you very much in advance for behaving well. So now welcome, Hari, and thanks for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you on board. So let's kick off with a question on the subject of transitioning a company from startup to professionalized firm or high growth tech company, which is basically what Property Guru is now, and the very reason you were brought in by the founders back in 2016. So how difficult is it, Hari, to make that transition, and what are the barriers to doing so, particularly in terms of work, culture, and staff mindsets?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here. I think this is a great question to kick off on, because I think this whole concept of mindset is critical. It's critical for the leader as well. So in this case, I'd say, a leader needs to be putting learning at a premium. You should be seeking out opportunities every chance you get. And when you think about any company, and we can talk more about this during this session, but culture and mindset are critical. They're absolutely core. While scrappiness is a virtue in the early days of a company, the focus on quality must become core over time. And so when I think about my journey here with Property Guru, I'd sort of say purpose has been critical. Building a purpose for this organization. And when you're in hyper growth, you got to know what exactly are you sprinting towards. So getting that purpose right is actually fairly critical. Because when you are in high growth companies, sometimes, as the cliche goes, you can mistake activity with progress. And without a sense of purpose, you can really it results in a lot of chaos. And I think the final part, which sometimes I'd say early stage companies ignore, is values. I think there have to be corporate values that are non-negotiable, set in stone. Everything cannot be flexible. I think that's the thing. We tend to sort of say, oh, you got to be scrappy, you're a startup. Yes, in certain practices, I think that's the right approach. But when it comes to your values, you've got to have some things that are absolutely inflexible, because that's what actually allows you to attract and retain certain people and make sure that you stay on core with what you're trying to deliver.
Definitely, and we'll come back and explore both brand purpose and ethics or values, as you put it, a bit later on as well. But I wanted to ask you about, you know, the European founders of Property Guru who ran the company for 8 years and then stepped aside to pave the way for you as the company figurehead. What does the process look like behind the curtain, you know, to have that transition? I imagine it's quite a painful journey to turn around the supertanker and to manage egos and all the rest of it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Dean. I think I'm blessed in the sense that Steve and Yanni are great people, and I think the three of us checked each other out well before I signed on the dotted line. We made sure that we were comfortable with each other. Our personal values resonated. We were clear as to what we wanted to do, but also I think the transition process is not something that should be done abruptly. Sometimes we have such a short attention span. I think patience tends to be so low these days within organizations that there's an expectation that you can make a transition happen within a month or two, maybe a quarter at the most, and that you can then shift the culture and do this turnaround, as you put it, within, let's say, 2 or 3 quarters. The reality, as I experienced it, was we took a solid 7 to 8 months of just 2 in a box, 3 in a box it is, because we had 2 founders and I was taking over from both of them, and essentially making sure that Steve and Yanni were still at the wheel. People got comfortable with me. I took over one function first. Over my career, I've had experience in marketing and product management and in sales. And I gave the founders and the board the option to say, which function would you like me to run to start with? And we started it with sales, and I took over all the regions and I sort of integrated them and got a little bit into the weeds. And I think why this is critical is you start actually building your own brand, your own reputation within the organization, but also as a leader, you begin to get a little bit more of a grassroots view for what it feels like to work within the organization. Subsequently, we then went through a transition process, and I'd say it took us about 8 or 9 months to complete. We formally made the transition about 8 months, 9 months into me joining Property Guru. But Steve and Yanni continued to sit on the board. At that point, I joined them on the board right from the beginning. But from the employees' perspective, they saw this transition happen about 3 quarters in. And then for the next year or two, we gradually had them ease out. You know, Steve's still on our board. It's been 5 years since I joined the company. Steve's very much on the board. Yanni chose to step back and do other things. Steve himself is doing other things as well. And I think a part of this transition is understanding you're dealing with human beings. There are 2 founders who put blood, sweat, and tears into founding this company and running it for many years. It was their baby. They extended a lot of trust in bringing me in. And I wanted to sort of repay that trust by saying this transition is going to be one that's well managed. Having said so, in the end, one thing that was really critical for me for this to work was that it was going to be my company to run. And I wasn't going to be someone else's COO effectively. And I think that was something which the guys were very good at honoring. That was definitely the agreement, and they lived up to it. But we went through this process as an organization. And I'd say that plus the cultural transformation actually took us the better part of 3 years to execute. And it was well worth it, because by the end of that, we had established a mindset, we had changed our technology, we had changed our talent, and then we had this clear purpose of where we're going. But we had done it in such a way that Steve, Yanni, and I are on excellent terms to date. One of them is still on the board, and that's entirely up to him as to when or if he wants to ever step off. And I'm running an organization which I like in my style and with my own flavor. And I think that takes time.
Great. Yeah. So the gradualist approach rather than the big bang approach is the way to go then in that regard. Yes. Okay. Now I want to ask you, Hari, about executive networks. I know you're a member of the Young Presidents Organization, a fairly prominent member, and you've benefited from that experience. But the eligibility criteria is actually pretty high for YPO, right? So what would you say to those executives and aspirants who want to be better themselves, but maybe can't follow such routes where the cost or eligibility of a particular network is kind of beyond their reach? You know, how can they upskill themselves organically? You know, what's the trick to that, if there is one, or many?
No, I definitely think having a professional network, a healthy professional network is critical. So I think one thing that's important to understand is I've been working for 20 years and I've only been a member of the YPO for the last 3. So I think, I was networking well before I discovered YPO, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think upskilling requires individual will. And are you willing to be flexible? Are you exploring and learning all the time? Do you attend, for example, learning sessions at INSEAD or Block 71 or at companies in other industries? Why not, if the answer is no? So YPO, coming back to that, is it acts like a peer group for CEOs and senior leaders. And its main purpose is if I were to paraphrase, is to recognize the fact that the top of the pyramid is a lonely position. You are meant to solve everything and everything is your fault. And at the same time, everyone assumes your life is about champagne parties on yachts. So I think only a peer group can help you keep it real. And I have sought intellectual peers my entire life. So going back to your question, I started my career in the Silicon Valley in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I used to audit classes at Stanford and Berkeley when I was in my very first job. I used to do networking sessions within healthcare and sustainability and deep tech when I had my career was in India, and then subsequently even after moving to Singapore. The reality is I've never worked or studied in any of those spaces, but I feel better informed on the world, and I think that makes me a better leader. So when it comes to networking, the reality of the fact is not all of us are extroverted, because there's a perception that networking requires extroversion. I don't actually believe that at all. There's actually a lot of leaders who are either introverted or what we call ambiverts, who are able to sort of project extroverted personality traits, but actually derive strength from within. So I think the reality is you have to realize there are lots of people out there who are like you, and you have to put yourself out there. But I think the one thing that you cannot take away from it, it does take a little bit of courage to take that first step and go to that first set of networking sessions. What I encourage you to do is go somewhere where you are uncomfortable. The first time is the worst. It gets better every subsequent time.
Yeah. Yeah, do things that make you uncomfortable, for sure. That's the way to go. Okay, interesting phrase there, ambiverts. That's a new one on me, but I like it. So now, Hari, we're going to bring up our first poll question and involve the audience. Hopefully they're not all ambiverts, or maybe they are, and this will help them. So get your voting fingers ready, and let us know what you think. Are executive networks currently too elitist? Please do vote away, and we'll give it another 15 seconds or so to get a view on that. Oh, it's interesting. Couple more seconds. Okay, let's end the poll there and bring up the results if we could. Okay. So 40% of people say yes, that's a big chunk, 27% no. For those watching this on catch up, not sure, 33%. Very interesting results, and suggest what you were saying is right. There are lots of ambiverts out there who need to kind of push themselves, right, to get involved in networks, whether they're elitist or not. Yeah.
And I think also I would, and actually I was surprised it was that balanced. I actually expected the yes to be off the charts. Yeah. I think it's a fair perception. I think I had a similar perception when I was a junior executive. But I think what I learned is put yourself out there and you'll be surprised to see how accessible some of these networking sessions can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And just jumping back to the startup world for a second, if we could, I wanted to ask you, why do you think that and I know you've spoken publicly about this before, so, why do you think dysfunctional work cultures are actually so common at these fledgling companies? I know you've said on stage that back in the day, Property Guru itself had a terrible culture, and more widely, is it about lack of experience, or I think you called it scar tissue, as you've called it, lack of scar tissue that, great managers and leaders have? Is it about no professionalism among startup leaders because they've never seen that before, right? They're so young, and overnight they get, you know, $500,000 in their bank account. They're expected to manage companies. Or have people in the startup world just swallowed that Steve Jobs book of dictatorial control when it comes to running a tech company? You know, what is it that's creating that leadership deficit we often see?
I think first off, I'd say that a lot of companies are not intentional about their purpose, their culture, their values, their communication. So even prior to me joining, Property Guru had great transparency, tremendous loyalty to each other and the founders. Actually, almost no politics or anything of that kind. So I think that was fantastic. So the culture was healthy in the sense that there were no negative elements that were visible there. But I think we needed a greater sense of purpose, which was shared and internalized by all the staff. So as I went around the team and I'd ask, okay, what are we in the business of doing? There'd be different words, there'd be different vocabulary. I always say words matter. And if I talk to 10 different people and I get 9 different answers, we have a problem. I don't know if it was quite that bad, but I think we definitely were spread pretty thin. And I think it was more about a shared understanding of where we're going. But if I had to put it on one thing, I'd say it's focus or the lack thereof. So the best thing a leader can learn to do is to say no. You know, there are nice ways of saying no. You can be constructive about it, but say no. Not maybe, not I'll think about it and I'll get back to you. Say no. I remember I always share this anecdote. The first year I was at Property Guru, I was in the elevator with a colleague of mine. She's still a leader at Property Guru, by the way, doing very well. But she sort of looked over at me. She said, good morning. And I said, good morning. And she said, every time I get an email from you, you're shutting down another project. So I looked over and I said, I'll take that as a compliment because we're going to do a few things and we're going to do them very well. So I think this whole element of focus is a little bit of a trained experience. You know, people need to get comfortable with the fact that it doesn't cost people jobs. It's actually quite the opposite. You take the same resources and focus them on fewer things. And I think that's the big issue when you look at some of the startups and their dysfunctional culture. The ones that survive, that avoid this, have great sense of purpose and are very good at prioritization.
Yeah, I remember reading about you saying that you cancelled a whole load of projects, and it's definitely true. I mean, you know, the friends I have working in startup land, I've worked for a couple of startups, right? There is a tendency to chase every ambulance down the road, right? Because one of them might have the key to success in. So definitely agree with that. Yeah. Okay. By the way, everyone out there in the audience, please do submit your questions via the Q&A as we go along, and as they pop up, we'll pick out the best ones of those. So don't be shy. Don't be ambiverts. Let's get some immersive happenings going on with the audience. So back to you, Hari. Just following up on that last question, who in the business world then, whether it's at an SME, an MNC, or a startup, who just stands out to you as a great industry leader who you know we could all learn from? It's almost a case study in what great leadership and great management and great company building is all about.
No, I thought of 2 or 3 examples, and you know, I think I was thinking about leaders who are inspirational to the world at large and not just within their company. I think there are a number of people who I regard as running their own organizations pretty well. But the first one that came to mind was actually Satya Nadella at Microsoft. And I think why I call him out is he reinvented, talk about a tanker. He reinvented essentially a company that, if you're being honest and you were within technology or actually part of any industry 10 years ago, they were beginning to become synonymous with bureaucracy and old tech. But today, if you look at Azure, SharePoint, Teams, what have you, the innovation speed is blazing. And I think culturally as well, when you deal with the staff at Microsoft, there's a humility mixed with confidence. And I think that's a phenomenal combination. If you're willing to be confident and realize I am good, but not be arrogant about it, be humble. And you know, this is one of those things. It does fall at the feet of the leader. I think as soon as he took over as CEO, you saw this massive shift in culture. So I think Satya is definitely one that came to mind. Another person I'd call her is actually Paul Polman from Unilever. And the reason I call him out is for a very different reason. Something very interesting happened, I think it was last year or the year before. You had this consortium, 3i, this private equity firm from Brazil, Kraft and Warren Buffett. They came in and they tried to buy Unilever. And what I found was remarkable was his willingness to tell them that Unilever could not be bought by them as their values were not aligned. See, typically when you have an acquisition, you'll have someone say something else, which is basically saying, go back, give us a higher price and we'll talk. But he went out and put in the FT and the Wall Street Journal, etc., essentially a piece saying that, no, our values are not aligned, essentially saying at no price will this marriage work. And then, of course, the correlate to that story is Unilever has done a great job of building itself forward. But that courage of conviction is very hard to do when you have people like Warren Buffett and Kraft and 3i, who's done a number of successful acquisitions on the other side. So I think those two came to mind. And I think closer to home, I'd say Mike Cannon-Brookes at Atlassian. I find him an incredible CEO because I think they were a phenomenal CEO, a company that built themselves basically on word of mouth, phenomenal tech itself. But I think also the willingness to lead industry and even, affect change in his country in Australia, for him to call out Elon Musk and say, can we make it more about renewable energy in Australia? I think, he's someone who's outside Australia, maybe parts of America. Many people may not know about him, but I enjoy always when he's got something to say. It's typically fairly intelligent.
Yeah, and not so inflammatory, right, as someone like an Elon Musk or
the other extreme.
Yeah, but yeah, three really great examples there. Appreciate that. Now, coming back to your kind of style at Property Guru, you call your staff guru. That sounds fun, but other than fitting the company masthead, what does it actually mean in practice?
So now it's an interesting thing. Yes, all employees at Property Guru are called gurus. I think it goes back to that word I used, a shared identity. It is core to building a cohesive culture. And in the premise is that our gurus are experts at their jobs, or at least that's what we aspire for them to become. We do not suggest they all are, but what we hope to do is to help themselves develop. We have a fairly ambitious learning and development program for a company our size. And I think in the end, the name actually ties them to each other and to the company. And I think that shared identity is something which, you cannot underestimate the value of.
Yes, definitely. Everyone's pulling in the same direction. Absolutely. Okay. And I'm sure you have millennials and Gen Z folk working for you, like any good tech company. How does your management approach differ when working with the younger generation as compared to baby boomers, if it differs at all? Because, I just want to ask that question because ageism or, different styles of management is really at the top of most leaders' agendas these days in terms of things they have to learn and ways to move their companies forward. So what are your thoughts there, Hari?
See, I think in the end, all people want clarity. They want purpose. They want a sense of fairness. They want to be recognized. So these are universal truths. In my experience, the generational shifts have been more gradual. They've been more subtle. Than is, it doesn't make for a nice sensational article, but in my experience as a leader, the shifts tend to be more subtle. I try and view each person as an individual. I do not generalize. I don't think good leaders can succeed by playing to the averages. So essentially, if you do that, you're going to miss a lot, in my experience. Mm-hmm. I think you've got to find inclusive ways to get feedback from everyone. We at Property Guru have started embracing asynchronous work elements. So for example, in simple language, giving someone 24 hours to give feedback on a document rather than making a decision within a live meeting. This brings together the extroverts, the introverts, the ambiverts, the Gen Zs, the baby boomers, brings everyone together. And it gives everyone a chance to speak and to think because people process at different times. So if you want the best out of everyone, you got to create equity versus equality. Equality means everyone's got the same chance. You stick your hand up, whoever sticks their hand up gets a chance. That's equal opportunity, right? Well, not really, but that assumes that everyone has the same capability or the same processing style. And I think equity is about actually understanding that people think differently. And so you have to work as a leader to create that. So I think maintaining standards and coming down hard on your sort of values violations, those are the kind of things we sort of look at to essentially make sure that things are well. But I don't see massive differences. And by the way, just as a data point, my executive team, the average age is 45, and we have 3 people in their 50s. So we do have, it's not like we're surrounded by people in their 20s.
Interesting. But I mean, more generally, and then speaking, bigger picture, do you think ageism has now joined racism and sexism as yet another serious problem in the modern workplace? I mean, I've heard about board meetings at certain startups, for example, where they talk about ensuring nobody over 40 is hired, which seems like madness, as those people have such expertise and talent. And, recently we had Mark Reed, the WPP CEO, kind of bragging about, how no one from the 80s was working at the agency these days, and he got pilloried for that. So is it an issue?
I think it's incredibly stupid. If someone has that approach, I'll be quite severe on that. I think that's stupid, because I think you've got to be able to mix energy with experience. I think if you get them both, you're able to get the best. So you need to value skills and look for the values fit your org. That's my thing. Again, going back to my executive team, I'd say the biggest prankster actually in my leadership team is in his late 40s. And I'd say one of the most process-oriented people she's in her late 30s. So you can't believe that everyone is a particular way at a particular time. I have colleagues in the company who are in their 20s and their 50s, and we get energy, enthusiasm, experience from each one that fits our values. So I think it comes down more to values. I think more scarily, particularly in countries, many developed countries, you're seeing life expectancy go up, and you're going to see people live 100 years. I think it's ominous if you start thinking that anyone over 40 is useless. They got 60 years of life left, maybe, 30 years of productive professional work left if they choose. I mean, it's their choice, of course. And I think it's pretty foolhardy for you to lose out on all that experience.
Yeah, that's a very good point, isn't it? We're in different times now, and as you say, life expectancy is definitely going to be extended, particularly as modern medicine gets even more advanced. But let's ask the audience what they think with our next poll question, which is ageism becoming a serious problem in the workplace? So you now have 30 seconds to vote, people. You can vote good, bad, or not sure. So what do you think? Okay, the votes are starting to come in. Oh. Oh. I think we got the wrong answers actually came up there. But anyway, I think people mean, well, let's say yes, good is yes, no is bad, and C is not sure, right? So 60% not sure. Yeah, okay, let's call it there. So around 17% say yes, 33 no, okay, 60 not sure. Okay, interesting. So, in your intro there, I broached upon responsible technology, which I know you talked about previously. And if you Netflix social dilemma, which details the use of behavioral economics by the businesses like Google and Facebook, which is designed to create device addiction and misinformation rabbit holes that lead to increased ad revenue for such platforms, and indeed a downgrading of democracy. So, as a responsible technologist yourself, should these decacorns have such societal power, or should they be more heavily regulated, in your view, Hari?
So I think to start with, I don't think any company intended for their tech to deliver the outcomes they have started to deliver. That does not mean that they can wash their hands of it. I feel some companies have a strong moral compass. I see Jack Dorsey at Twitter as a very strong moral leader. That's the role of purpose. It aligns junior staff on what is right versus what is wrong. I do believe that some form of regulation is inevitable, but I think the question is more interesting than that. Who is going to regulate us exactly? Because today we're also seeing this splinter net, as they say, the two biggest internet nations in the world have very different worldviews on almost everything, from privacy to sovereign rights. And so as consumers of Alibaba and Spotify, Atlassian and LinkedIn, which regions regulators will own rights, will our rights be regulated by? So I actually think the question might become more about, and I foresee a future where we will own our own data, and each of us will have to decide what and when to share with whom. So how much inconvenience will you accept in exchange for greater privacy, for instance? That's a personal choice. But I think quality must triumph over quantity. Today, there's a lot of data, lots of fake news. And I think the magic will happen when we regain trust in our information sources and when this data becomes insight. So I think about regulation, but I'd also think about this whole emphasis on quality. And I know some of these big platforms are putting a lot of effort and a lot of really good engineering talent behind it. But I think I always go back to the time when I joined LinkedIn. LinkedIn was a very small company when I joined it. We had only about 300 staff globally. Well, globally, most of them were in the US and I was the only one in Asia. But I remember talking to someone in our data science team. And at the time, we had roughly the same number of behavioral scientists as we had data scientists. So we had enough people asking what will happen, how will a human being think about this? And then we had other people thinking about how do we gamify it, how do we codify it, etc. So my question is, how many of those behavioral scientists are out there? And I'd say the value that they have is probably arguably higher than that of the data scientist.
Definitely. And what was there a company mantra at LinkedIn? Like Facebook has move fast and break things, and Google, before it changed to Alphabet, used to have do no evil or something like that. Was there anything along those lines when you were at LinkedIn?
No, I mean, we had a mission, of course, and that was to connect the world's professionals. So it was very much about that. But internally, when it came to it, we had corporate values, we had culture, etc. But I think it was much more about, I think the primary one was acting like an owner. We had a term called act like an owner. And I used to always joke, it's act like an owner, not the owner. So what that means is have a sense of ownership. Don't be arrogant about who we are or how we are when we're dealing with external or internal clients. So that sense of ownership was, I think, central to it. But I think it also goes back to your earlier question when it comes to startups. That was a startup run by a man in his 40s, started by a man in his 40s, with an executive team of everyone in their 40s. There were no 20-year-olds running LinkedIn when it was a startup. And if you go across the line and you look at all the companies that we really look up to, they were either started or seriously scaled up when their leaders in their 40s, the notable exception obviously being Facebook. But I'd say in most other cases, they did that. And even if you have that, no one, and I don't think Mark Zuckerberg would suggest he's doing this by himself. He's surrounded by executives who have decades of experience around them. And I think that's something which companies in this part of the world are also processing. I think we went through this transition. I'm hoping we're the first of many, because I think it doesn't mean founders need to step away. But I do think founders need to surround themselves with complementary talent. And as of date, I'm not seeing enough of that yet.
So is it the VCs that are at fault then? Because like you said, lots of companies, the most successful companies have older executive teams, and indeed there are academic studies that are peer-reviewed that suggest, the average age of a really successful startup founder is actually 45, right? But venture capitalists would much rather fund someone who's younger and cheaper and maybe not so wise to the ways of the world. Do you think some responsibility lies there then in that case?
Yeah, it is tight. It is tight in the sense that even in VCs aren't all of the same kind either. So if you look at the VC ecosystem in Singapore, I'd say it's coming of age now. I'd say a lot of the early VCs, we had a few who were notable and were good. They had ex-operators, people who had run companies who knew what they were doing. A lot of the others were smart, well-intentioned people who are either strategy consultants or investment bankers who are venture capitalists. Nothing wrong with that. I think you need to have they bring a lot of skill sets which are necessary, analysis, structured thinking, etc. But if you've never actually run a function or run a business, there's a limit to how much you can advise. And so I think when you look at some of the newer VCs or the newer people who are coming into the older firms today, you're seeing people who have run businesses, who have run functions, who are operators, ex-operators. And I think that becomes critical, because then you begin to assess talent better. Now, to be fair, I've never actually heard them think about the entrepreneur as cheaper if they are less expensive, if they are younger, sorry. So they've never associated the expense amount with the age. But I think there is this sort of I would say it's almost like pop culture belief that, startups are surely something you do straight out of uni, and you sort of build this blazing story, you do that. And it's a glorious story. I mean, it's a wonderful, and there are companies that do that, but there are very, very, very few that are companies that we talk about. And so I think, yeah, I'd say VCs have a role, but I think they're also maturing as these companies mature.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good point. Okay, so I see we have a question coming in from the audience, so we'll take that next. But just before we do move on from this topic, I just wanted to ask you about Property Guru itself, and how exactly is the company adhering to your mantra of responsible technology? What are you doing to make a difference in that regard?
So about 3 years ago, I want to say, I put out a post on LinkedIn talking about responsible tech. And it was not specifically about Property Guru. It was just a call to action to all technology leaders based on my experience. And I suggested a model, which I call the 3I model. And the 3I the first I stands for inform, the second one for inspire, and the third for introduce. And what I said is, when disruption comes, people sometimes get, the incumbent players get disrupted. So whether you look at the incumbent travel agents, the old world recruiters, these are two industries that I disrupted prior to Property Guru. And I think the technology that's coming in actually bears some responsibility to inform them that disruption is coming. The second I is inspire, where you upskill the willing. So if people are willing to build the new tech skills or the digital skills that are necessary, you need to play a part in upskilling them, not just watch as a bystander and say, oh, tough, they got to figure it out. I think if you're being responsible, you got to climb in there. And then the third I introduces, if they're not willing to be upskilled, maybe their skills could be useful for another industry. So coming to Property Guru, what we did is we reached out to the government, and we had Minister Chanchun Singh. We have twice a year, we have agent summits here in Singapore, property agent summits. And we had him come in, and he was the head of the NTUC at the time, the Trade Union Congress. And he came in, stood on stage, and essentially told an audience full of, I think, 400 to 500 property agents that they were going to be obsolete if they didn't build skills. So he went and told them the revolution is upon them. And he says, nothing to do with Property Guru. It's consumer expectations are different. They're going to be digitized. So you can either upskill yourself, or he gave a few suggestions. So that was inform. The inspire part has been the most interesting. So we've done a few different things. We partnered with U Learning Hub, which was part of the NTUC. And we actually built an entire curriculum for digital skills for agents. So we had, and it covered everything from search to social media, property, portals, social, anything that they could use when it came to digital technology. And we had a couple of our employees actually as part of the faculty who actually taught this program. So I think we participated in this upskilling the willing, as I said. The final we actually introduced a bunch of agents to Airbnb, because we said agents know neighborhoods really well. Maybe they could be virtual hosts, helping people check into Airbnbs, etc. So these were ideas we have. We continue to work on it. And actually in the next month or two, we're going to announce a much upgraded version of that digital training program that we worked with one of the local polytechnics here in Singapore to build a full new curriculum, much more ambitious based on the learnings of the first one. But we don't need to do any of this. We're not required to. I think this is us saying, listen, we are the disruptor. We're going to bring it. We're not going to slow down, but we can actually help people. Because if you upend society, who exactly is the winner? Because if society is broken, there's no company that's going to be a winner. And I think this is something that technologists need to internalize.
Yeah, but particularly in these times, right, during COVID, which has kind of pressed the reset button on everything, and has only fastened the road to the fully digital world. So absolutely, it's good to hear you doing that. Right, I see we have a couple of questions come in. So first one, we have Chris Stevenson, who says, how do you create a financial incentive for big social platforms to behave more ethically, and should this be first or last resort rather? And I think that's Chris Stevenson from PhD. Yeah,
I think it's a great point. It's probably also inspired by some of the thinking that came out in the social dilemma. I think a lot of us have talked about the role of the financial ecosystem, because incentives are so set up, particularly if you're a listed large digital business of any kind. You are so much sort of in control of the quarterly results, and your ability to actually forecast and deliver. That sort of drives all your thinking. And so monetization and rapid growth often trumps everything else. I think with the incentives, I think there's already a lot of thinking that's going on. People are talking about moving more out of the sort of a shareholder theory to moving more to stakeholder theory. What is your effect on the broader ecosystem? I think that some of that thinking is beginning to happen already. In the end of it, you're going to need leaders and boards actually to just make that determination for themselves. I think sometimes that requires biting down. Again, I'll call Jack Dorsey up again. I think Twitter took a bit of a shellacking a few years ago when he made some changes around how they report and how they talk about things. But he talked about what's good for their ecosystem and what's not. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a company that's done everything perfectly well, but I think you need that kind of courage. You got to go out there, stand in front of the street, take a bit of a hammering and shift direction. That's one option. And that's not particularly appetizing if you're sitting in the CEO's seat or you're a board director. So I think we need to think about this broader and think about, investors, what exactly do you want the company to focus on, and what exactly are you going to reward them? Are you going to really reward them on their ESG practices, or is ESG going to become another CSR in 3 or 4 years? I hope not, because, for all our sakes, if COVID wasn't there, I fully believe this would have been the year of climate change. We'd have talked about nothing but climate change. But I think, and to some degree, it is coming back into the conversation in the last couple of weeks. But I think it is a fair question. I don't have a solution for it, but I think it requires everyone, including the leaders of the organization, to actually show intent.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And let's jump back now to data, which you kind of touched upon earlier. And it's really the gold of this century, isn't it? In terms of the asset class, whether that's a good or a bad thing. So I know you said that people can control their own data, and maybe they do a deal where they sign away a certain amount in exchange for free services. But it seems to have moved beyond that quite quickly, right? Because I mean, a lot of these agreements that you sign up to when you hand over your data, let's be honest, nobody reads them. They're tens of, if not hundreds of pages long, right? So you have no idea really what you're signing up to. And it seems like with advanced AI, virtual personal assistants, and the 5G super cycle all on the near horizon, that's only going to be exacerbated. So is it a good or bad thing, that data has become so valuable, and should we just forget about data privacy and just say, okay, that was last century, we've moved on from that?
No, it's a very fair question, but I don't think so. I think privacy is, first off, I'd say privacy is valued differently in different societies, different age groups. So I think it's one thing we should not imagine that any one of us speaks for all of us. So, I think that's one thing I've realized both from my time at LinkedIn, but also at Property Guru. People have different expectations of what data privacy stands for. I do believe greater control will come into our hands for us to decide for ourselves, as I mentioned. I think 5G is an interesting point to bring up. I think 5G, it's sort of, it's kind of like going back in time and the time when we were with our Nokia handsets, which were so brilliant at the time. I still loved mine. And you describe a world where you have apps and you're able to do all the things we're able to do today. it's kind of hard to even process what that looks like. I think if you look ahead 5 or 6 years post 5G, it's that kind of behavioral change that's going to come. But with that much bandwidth and that much availability of information, you could be able, there's an argument to be made that you could have convenience without having to hand over that much data. Because I think today it's sort of an either or. You can, for example, make, if you are an expert on these digital platforms, protect your privacy, and you'll have almost no convenience. The recommendation engines won't work well. You'll have a seriously subpar experience, but you could, in theory, you could do that. It'd be interesting to see whether with all that bandwidth in the future, where convenience is brought together by speed and access to various things, you'll have IoT, Internet of Things, you have all these sensors within the home and in the neighborhood, which are able to do things without personally identifiable information. Because in the end, you got to remember, that's what everyone's worried about, the personally identifiable information. If I can get all that convenience without handing that over, is there the potential for these platforms to rethink how they collect and how they use this data? I would like to believe so. I'm an eternal optimist, so I would like to think so.
Interesting. So how many years until we get the smart home section on Property Guru, do you think?
We've dabbled with it. We actually did a little bit of a pilot with a little startup over here where we actually had, for people who are looking to rent out their homes, we had smart locks and agents could sort of, set up, it was easy for them to access apartments, etc. I think I would say in 5 or 6 years, these technologies are going to be ubiquitous. So a platform like us would have to offer it, would have to offer some sort of an interface to that.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, before we move on from big tech, let's just ask the audience what they think. So if we could bring the next poll question up on the screen, it is, should big tech be more heavily regulated? The choices are yes, no, not sure. So get voting now. We'll give it around 30 seconds. Yeah, that's interesting so far. We're about halfway through the voting time. Yes is at 75% at the moment. So people are fans of regulation, it seems. 5 more seconds to go if you haven't voted yet. All right, let's leave it there. Wow. So we have 80% saying yes, we should see more regulation of big tech, 13% no, and 7% say not sure. Interesting. Okay. All right. So in that case, let's move on. I think we have some more questions in from the audience. So we have one from someone who wishes to remain anonymous, but says, I'm sure the pandemic must have affected business, given that it took time for people to pivot to online home viewings. How are you leading Property Guru through the pandemic? And how do you see the landscape changing going forwards? How do you foresee these changes affecting how you lead going forwards? Long question. And are there new leadership qualities that you think would be more important in this new normal, which I think is the most interesting part of the question, actually. Yeah, so Hari, over to you.
Yeah, lots of nuances to that. So I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that this is firstly a healthcare issue. I mean, it is first a health crisis. Before we get to the economic crisis and all the other issues, it is first and foremost a health crisis. And I think fear, lack of clarity, and the speed of this disruption has led to irritation and exhaustion. So I think the first thing as a leader is just clarity of communications. I have sent a weekly video every week since mid-March. Every Wednesday morning, like clockwork, every guru will get access to this video. We share it on our internal distribution platforms. And it's sharing my views. Is typically 2 or 3 minutes, just shot on my phone. And I'm trying to be authentic with my emotions, and at the same time giving them a little bit of perspective on how is the business actually doing. And particularly you sort of reference our fundraising. Prior to that, It was completely rational. The people looking out, they're seeing their neighbors lose jobs. They're seeing people getting 50, 60, 70, 80% of their pay get docked. These are real concerns that people have. Because first concern was, I don't want to get the disease. The second concern was, I don't want to lose income or my employment. So I think you've got to have some clear red lines within your own personal value system. So well before we raised money, I sort of informed the board that we would not cut jobs or salaries. It was a decision we took. And we had strong financials coming into 2020. That definitely helped. We're also not in the travel or hospitality industry, so that helps. Admittedly, our industry did slow down. But I think we needed a clear call from the top, and I felt I needed to make that one. And I think, everyone just assumes that even board directors will sometimes assume you need to do what company X is doing. There's a company that they look up to and they say they are doing whatever. They're doing 4 days a week. They're doing a 20% job cut. They're putting people on furloughs, whatever it might be. Now, listen, I listened to everything and I definitely observed a lot of companies. I spoke to a lot of my peers who are CEOs, not just here, but in Australia and in India, actually a couple of them in North America as well. But then I looked within myself and I did what's right for Property Guru, because I'm the only one running this company. And I think not meeting people in person, it makes it much harder to lead for my leadership style in particular. And I think, I do believe that if you think about the relationships that our employees have with each other, in many ways, they're drawing down on the social capital that they have built with each other. They've built this bank of social capital, relationships, through all the engagements they've had over the years. But here they're pulling down against that and drawing it down. And I think that's something to recognize and to talk about it openly. It's awkward when you do it initially, but once I sort of got out there and started talking about it more, you started seeing more clarity of decision-making. We saw, some of our products, we expedited virtual viewing products and a sort of really immersive product. That decision wasn't made by me, but it was made by a leader who was very clear about what Property Guru is doing. It was made by a leader who was clear that he was not going to lose his job and his team was not going to lose their jobs because of COVID. I mean, performance-related stuff. After the first few months, we went back to regular performance management, not ruthless, but just regular performance management, because you still need to maintain a sense of excellence. But I think I said, I go back to that thing, that sense of fairness needs to be there. Are you there for me when times get tough, or is the first thing to get jettisoned the employees? And what we did is we took deep cuts on our search engine marketing, on our marketing budget in general, deep cuts on our, obviously travel disappeared overnight, but even entertainment, any form of cuts that we could take, we took. And then we pulled from our reserves, not something that the board loved. But that's my job. And those are the hits that I have to take, that the CFO has to take. That's what we get paid to do. And then, we also obviously ran a parallel track to start raising money to make sure that we could keep doing this. We had sufficient cash reserves because we were cash flow positive for the last couple of years. So we were starting from a good position, and Q1 was great for us actually. So in March we were fine, but then obviously Q2 we fell off a cliff, and it's been a recovery period ever since. But I think you've got to be honest and tell your staff that, listen, there are times when I feel scared or I feel troubled, but I believe in what we're doing. And there are certain lines we won't cross, like employment and job security, etc. And that helps people understand and sort of work with each other. So the corollary to this is our employee engagement survey just came back last week. We've never had higher engagement within our staff. And even internally as well as externally, actually, even things like Glassdoor, etc. We've never had as high a rating as we have this year. And I think a lot of it has to do with how we've handled the COVID period.
Yeah, excellent. And we'll actually come back to COVID in a while, and we'll be having a poll question on that, so stay tuned. But sticking with your industry, Hari, COVID aside, I just wonder why is it taking so long for PropTech to disrupt the real estate space? I mean, it seems to be, and this is really an outsider's view, so feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but it seems to be that PropTech is way behind other comparable industries like travel, for example. So if it is, what's causing that drag?
I think it's a fair observation for anyone outside the company or outside our industry. But I think I'd start by saying it is by far and away the largest asset class in the world. 2/3 of all assets held in the world today are real estate. So that's how large it is versus anything else. And so it is the biggest risk that any person can ever take in their life. it is the most, and therefore by extension, the most protection is needed. As a result of this, this protection is often done by governments. It's a highly regulated sector, and I think that's the right thing to do, by the way, because there's a lot of uh, interest that go into this. Now, if you look at Singapore, the Singaporean dream is home ownership, and if you're not able to protect that, you have a big problem. You have a societal issue. So I think when you come to our asset class, you have that. The other problem is obviously just a generational thing. A lot of the real estate companies are controlled by an older generation that is set in their ways. And now that is changing over time as the daughters and sons take over. But I think there are also innovations which aren't visible to the consumer. For example, within urban planning or construction tech, there are augmented reality construction hard hats being used today. Consumers don't use this, but construction sites use it. So consumers don't use it for anything, by the way, other than maybe gaming. And yet this is used to build buildings today. You are seeing, things like real-time immersive virtual tours, like the products we've used. Let me put it to you this way. I used to be in online travel, so I don't say this lightly. If the online travel platform or the airline or the hotel screws up on your holiday, you're probably going to be irritated. If someone screws up with probably your life savings, I don't know whether there's a word to describe the emotion you're feeling at that moment. So that's kind of what we are dealing with. So having said all of this, I think there's still a lot more we can do. And so that's why you are seeing us do things like bringing out mortgage marketplaces this year, or our sales process automation software for developers, where you'll be the beneficiary, but we're digitizing essentially the supply chain within the B2B, so the consumer gets more information, faster solutions, etc. So I think there's a lot of digitization which does not necessarily have to be consumer facing.
Okay, so the stakes are just much higher, and
right.
Regulation is much tighter, and so there's a cautionary principle. Yeah, got it. So that segues quite nicely to my next question. I wanted to ask you if Property Guru will go global and launch in other markets beyond Southeast Asia, given that real estate is indeed very much localized to each country in the way that it works as an industry and the way that it's regulated. And the second part of that question is, if you can't go global, is unicorn status still achievable for you guys, or are you there already? Maybe you're there already. Tell me.
I think let me take the last question first. I've actually asked that question multiple times by Bloomberg, and then what I said is, it is something that other people like to put on you. I am not one of those CEOs who actually fancies that, because frankly, I don't think that's the finishing line. So I wouldn't consider that a win if we went over that. I think for us, the going back to your question though, I think we're already fairly unique. Not too many companies in prop tech or who run property marketplaces are in multiple markets. You think about the leaders in the Western markets or the ones in China or in Japan. They're all single market companies. The ones in the US don't exist in Canada. The ones in Australia do not exist in New Zealand. So you don't even have the logical adjacencies happening. Now you do have a couple in Europe, which are there in a few countries, and then you have some much smaller ones in the Middle East. So there are some examples, but I'd say at our scale, I'd say we are pretty unique globally in terms of what we're able to do, to be in 5 markets and at our scale, at our valuation, et cetera, as you pointed out. I think what we've tried to do is, build our scale through our technology platform, have a uniform technology platform, also through our teams. We have a single online marketing team that makes online marketing decisions. So we do have centers of excellence or technology ways of building scale. Having said that, there are a couple of our businesses that do exist outside Southeast Asia. So the sales process automation software has an agency marketplace. So agents can access new projects that are coming out via this product called FastKey. There is an agent marketplace in mainland China that is a part of our business. So we have a business in mainland China which connects Chinese agents to Southeast Asian property. We also have an awards business that's there in 15 markets. It's there in China, it's in Japan, it's in Australia. This year we entered in India, it's in Sri Lanka, Mongolia, and every market of Southeast Asia, all of them, including Cambodia and the Philippines, etc., where we don't have consumer businesses. There we essentially are building a business where we're helping developers build a brand and differentiation using an award show that's actually audited. And so there's a high degree of credibility. Our largest advertisers cannot buy a win, which sometimes can be hard for our sales teams. but it builds this credibility. So we do have these platforms, and the benefit of that, Dean, is it gives us a ringside seat as to the evolution of these different countries. And so, for instance, we were in 4 markets before I joined Property Guru. And one of the countries where we saw our awards business doing really well was Vietnam. And then obviously towards the tail end of 2016, we took an investment, which we sort of completed in 2018. And Batong San, which is the market leader in Vietnam, is, I can say for a fact, and the size of that business, it is the same size. The Vietnam entity is the same size as our largest regional competitor. So just Vietnam alone is as large as our largest regional competitor, who's a multi-market player. But the only way we had access to that was because of the awards business. So we could see how Batong San was doing before we went and acquired them. Now we have similar ringside views in many countries, in those 15 countries. We are not making any imminent decisions to move, but I think it does not preclude that option, because as long as we have a technology platform and we have these centers of excellence, it creates optionality for us. But I don't think we need to do that to achieve any valuation milestones. Because I think valuation milestone you talked about, very much attainable within the 5 markets we're in. I think whether we passed it or will pass it, I won't react to, but it's quite easy to do so at our scale at this point.
Yeah. And it all started from a shop house in Chinatown, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And Sago Street. Yes.
Great. Okay. So I wanted to ask you about another topic that's high on the agenda for many leaders. It's really cancel culture, if we can call it that. So I wanted to ask you, is cancel culture a good thing for society because it drives up ethical standards? And again, these big tech platforms have a big role to play in this, right? Or does it actually prevent leadership because people become scared to say or do anything bold, actually, for fear of being ended tomorrow?
Yeah, no, it is a dangerous area, because I think there are, it's a great one where, if you don't actually have a clear definition of what exactly it stands for, cancel culture is becoming a bit of a catch-all. And, the question I have is, where does cancel culture actually become doxing? Because as you just pointed out, what you're beginning to see is, first of all, people rush to judgment. How are you making your decisions? Are they based on, very often these judgments are based on fake news. So what's your data source to actually make a decision on a particular brand or a particular enterprise or whatever it might be? I think I'm not convinced yet that it drives up ethical standards. I think it does make it okay to have a hair trigger. I think that is a fair statement to make. I think we're seeing a lot of hair trigger reactions going on around. I think as societies, we need to introspect, because I think we need to have constructive freedoms and the ability to speak, and I fully believe in that. But each society does have, by the way, a slightly different definition of constructive even. And I think I abhor political correctness, like a lot of people that I know at least. And I think that's fine, but how can we then consider online hate speech? Even here in Singapore, there's so much online hate speech about certain races, about certain practices, about certain companies. How is that a good thing? I don't see how that helps anything other than helping someone vent. And I don't even know if it helps them, because it probably just builds up more anger.
Yeah, it's a very good point and a very contentious issue, right? As is COVID. So just before we move to the poll question on COVID, actually, was there anything else that you've found challenging about dealing with the new norms, like work from home and so on? And, are people still working from home? I know as of this week, right, as of today, people are allowed to go back to work in shifts, 50% of people. How are you handling that at Property Guru? And what does the future look like if there are going to be more people working from home more of the time? What does the real estate end of the market look like for offices and so on, right? Because there's going to be not so much need for it then.
So I think, first off, like a few pundits have said, I do believe that human beings are social beings. So I don't actually believe you can do everything virtually. So I don't subscribe to that. But having said that, well, let me first answer the most tactical of your questions. I think we operate in 5 markets. We have 1,300 plus gurus, only 200 of them are in Singapore. So the reality of the fact is, in two of our markets, in Vietnam and in Thailand, everyone is fully back in the office. Vietnam for many weeks, Thailand for about, I think, a week and a half at this point. In Singapore, we saw the new resolution. We tend to be fairly conservative. We trail government decisions by a couple of weeks. We try and see what happens. And then we move people back in shifts, and then we see how it goes. We have made a wholesale changes to how we do internal practices. I made reference to how we use Teams and Slack within the organization, asynchronous work. I think having a default Zoom or Teams link will be there for every meeting going forward. We actually brought in some experts from other companies that are at the forefront of asynchronous work, including a leader from Twitter to help us advise, thinking through how they have done it and sort of learn from them. I think what I'm seeing is, like many companies, I actually was very worried. I saw a massive spike in productivity. I think Property Guru was being much more productive in the first 3 or 6 months of COVID than in ever in its past. And I went and spoke to every CEO, and they were seeing the same. And the reality is, I think people are taking all their fear and their frustration and throwing it into work. They also did not know how to turn off. If I'm sitting here in my study where I'm talking to you right now, and it's now 8:35, it's fine because I'm talking to you. But let's say it's an average day and I'm just going and I'm going and I'm going. When do I cut off? And so I think my concern is, and it's beginning to play out now, less so, I think even in Property Guru, even though we're trying to take active measures, I think at some point the productivity peaks and then people burn out, and productivity actually will crater, in my opinion. I think it'll fall significantly, well below where it used to be, because people are burning out or are just finding it very hard to disconnect. And so I mentioned those weekly videos. I spent a lot of time actually just talking about tips about how people can turn off notifications, workplace notifications. How do they put a strict on working hours, something which you can be a little more lax when you're in the office. So I think things like that, every manager needs to decide, every leader needs to decide for their organization what is right for the culture. But for us, definitely, we're trying to coach people on it. Coming to your question on workplaces, that's a good question, because I think residential is going to go up. I think everyone, if they can afford it, will upgrade and try and get a slightly bigger space, because now suddenly in my house, my wife and I both work, and for a period, both our kids were homeschooling, and that was a nightmare. I am super grateful that my kids are back in school because there's space for my wife and I to both work now, and the Wi-Fi doesn't crap out and things like that. But I'm saying that as someone who's highly privileged. There are people who are much harder off in small houses where there's no capability to do this, creating tremendous stress within the families. So I think what's going to happen is residents are going to expand. When you come to commercial real estate, one of the interesting theories that's coming out is, and this data is from North America, but they said in North America, as a rule of thumb, about 80% of the office space today is used for cubicles and personal seating, and about 20% for collaboration space, so meeting rooms, cafeterias, and such. There's a theory now that it's going to go from that 80-20 to 20-80, where if the main reason you're going to the office is to meet people and collaborate, wouldn't it be interesting if most of our offices in the future are focused more about collaboration and brainstorming spaces, and much less so about dedicated cubicles and offices, which we might choose to do from our own homes. And that's an interesting theory. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. But I think markets where the financial capability and the infrastructure supports it, I think that will happen. Emerging markets, it might look more like it used to look a few months ago.
Got it. Yeah, interesting thoughts. Okay, well, let's ask the audience now what they think about COVID-19. So we'll bring up our next poll question, which is, in 2021, so next year, what will be the workplace legacy from COVID-19? Will it be work from home, automation, increased unemployment, economic collapse, or V-shaped recovery? Please get voting. Let's see if we've got optimists or pessimists in the Okay. So 5 seconds left, everyone, if you haven't yet voted. Okay. So we've got 50% believe that work from home will be the workplace legacy from COVID-19. 10% automation, 20% increased unemployment, 0% economic collapse. Well, that's good. I'm glad everyone's optimistic. And 20% V-shaped recovery. Okay. Hari, I don't know if you voted, but if you did, which one would you have voted for?
It's a hard one. I don't think there'll be economic collapse, and I don't think there'll be a V-shaped recovery. I don't think either of those will happen. I think the V-shaped recovery, there's too many. I mean, if you look at epidemiologists and what they're saying, I don't see any way in which you can predict a V-shaped recovery. I mean, there's a lot of different beliefs around, how and what a vaccine will look like and when. So I think there's going to be a lag between getting vaccines, people getting vaccinated, and then people getting comfortable. Those are three separate steps. So this V, unless you want to be really luxurious and look at a V that looks like that, I don't.
A K even, right?
Was that?
People are talking about a K-shaped recovery as well.
I believe that. No, that I actually fully believe. I actually fully believe a K-shaped recovery is already underway. And I think the stock market sort of point to that. And I think that's why you're seeing massive unemployment along with record stock markets. I think the K-shaped recovery is the only thing that explains that from what I've read.
Yeah, and government bailouts, I guess, help, don't they?
Government bailouts help, but I think they're delaying some of the things, right? I mean, it'll be interesting to see when these bailouts, they all have a time lapse. And then at some point it gets felt. But I think when people start losing their jobs, I don't know. I don't think there's enough of a social safety net to protect everyone.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Okay. Now you mentioned the stock market there. One thing I wanted to ask you as well is, what the end game looks like for Property Guru. Mm-hmm. Is it an IPO? I know that was talked about certainly last year. Or is it sale to a larger company? Are you able to give us any mood music on that?
No, I think, both of them are very much options, and I'm not trying to be coy about it. But the reality, the fact is, I never, and I mentioned this even last year when we were assessing, and we actually, as you pointed out, and you were being very polite about it, we actively pursued an IPO. And then we made a decision fairly far down the process to pull the plug. And I came out and we actually shared this on Bloomberg because I felt people need to understand that there is no, other than the ego bruising, there's actually no loss to the company out of making such a decision. So you got to be able to share these stories, because all we hear about is people who are wildly successful or the companies that disappear. Most of us inhabit the space in between. And I think a company like Property Guru is very successful, but once in a while things don't go our way. And we've got to sort of, have the courage to stand up and talk about it. I think when you talk about our future, now obviously having said that, the corollary to our, within quotes, pulled or failed IPO was that we were very successful in getting our two leading investors to put down significant money into the company this year. So, the company is fine. Its financial, its viability is fully secured. Its future is secured. We're investing hard again into R&D. You're going to see some fantastic new products and features come out later this year, or definitely early next year. I think I never said the IPO was a final thing. And I think that's something I learned. I was part of the team that took LinkedIn public. And I think we were very clear that it was a milestone marker, not the finishing line. And I was using very similar language within the company when we were preparing for it. Now, we didn't happen to pass that particular milestone marker. We went in a different direction. Will we pass it again? We might. I think we'll definitely consider it. We know what we need to do and not do. We came pretty close, so we know exactly what it will take for us to get there. And that is something we will keep as an option. I think we are now at a scale where the number of companies that can buy us are few. I think there are some of them who keep in touch with us over time. We're not actively soliciting buyers or anything. The reality is, at this scale, some of these buyers are going to have to be global or regional players, not sub-regional players. Let's put it that way. At this scale, it's just too large for anyone to buy. So I think but some of the big guys could absolutely buy us. And I think the key thing for me is to build an organization which continues to grow and thrive. We didn't try and build an asset to flip. We try to build an organization that even if someone bought us, they wouldn't just be buying Hari and, and pardon my language, a basket of shit underneath. They would be buying something that's actually viable and powerful. But I think I've seen a lot of companies, including in this region, which have sold and get all the praise for their exit. You need to go talk to the buyer 1 year later and see what they thought of that. Because I won't name anyone today on this call, but I'm thinking of them right now when I say this. Yeah. They should not have done that, because it made it a lot harder for other companies to sell. Because, and by the way, for them too, because now they have tried to do other companies and they have failed because now their reputation precedes them. So you got to be careful about these things. The world is small, reputation short. But I think in the end, values are values. If that's your values, those are your values. It's not what Property Guru is going to do. We're going to try and build an organization which will thrive. If we list, we list. If someone buys us, they buy us. But hopefully they like us so much that they kind of do what Microsoft did with LinkedIn. They spent $26 million and then left them alone to do what they were good at. I think that would be success for me if a trade sale were to happen. If someone would buy us and let us and just say, listen, you're doing a great job, keep doing it and make us a lot of money. If someone said that, I'd love that.
Yeah, of course, that depends upon the leadership team sticking around after their own period ends, doesn't it? Which is also quite rare. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you've worked here in Asia, you've worked in the US. I mean, if you have to categorize the different types of work cultures and leadership in those different places, how would you do so?
See, I think culture is an evolving object. The way we define it within Property Guru is who we are and who we aspire to be. So it is a growing thing. So for example, we never hire for culture fit. We hire for a values fit. Because the idea is, let's say, Dean, you were to come and join us tomorrow. You would bring something in which would help our culture evolve into the future. So we're not trying to get you to fit to something that is static. We're bringing you in to help grow something that is by definition dynamic. Now, having said that, when I look at the cultures that I've had a chance to work with, I started out in the Valley, as I mentioned. Now, the Silicon Valley is not America. Silicon Valley is the Silicon Valley. Even the Southern California doesn't have the same culture as the Valley. So the Valley is, and I'm glad there's a place like this in the world. I'm not clear it needs to be there in too many places, but to have a bunch of people who are so optimistic about the world that they will build things which frankly cannot work. I'd say 90% of the ideas coming out of the Valley cannot work as a business outside the Valley because nobody else would actually buy that stuff. But I think it's still wonderful because they innovate at such a pace that you then do end up with companies like Netflix and Google and Salesforce, etc. So I think you do have a lot of innovation that comes out of that. And I think what that culture taught me was courage of conviction, really just going for it. We sometimes talk about it here, but there are a handful of companies that do it, but I see a lot of people not back off when push comes to shove. And I think go for it even in the bad times. I was there during the .com bust. Nothing slowed down. They kept going. The so-called .com bust is what everyone called it outside the Valley. I lived through the entire bust period. There was no slowing down. So people just kept going.
It's kind of the birth of e-commerce. Anyway,
yeah,
isn't it?
totally.
Yeah.
So that's the point. People will look at anything and see an opportunity. So that's, I think, the culture that I experienced there. Versus like in Asia, I've seen the parts which I've enjoyed the most is I've seen more of an appreciation for the employee. Actually, because it's ironic, because very often the belief is, oh, it's very top down, it's very ruthless. It's not ruthless, but it's very sort of command and control style. Now, I think that is true in traditional Asian companies. There's no doubting that. There are certainly Asian companies that have that. But frankly, I don't think that's necessarily Asian. I think that's to do with a traditional company. I think there are certain traditional companies that have that in Europe and in North America too. I think what is different is Asian companies don't hit the fire button, meaning fire people, as the first option, which I see as much more common in the Silicon Valley and in Australia, for example. The first thing you'll do is you will fire. And I think what we have tried to build, for example, in Property Guru, we have an exec team that has Indians like myself, we have Southeast Asians, we have Australians, and we try and bring all these sensibilities together and we try and mash it up because we try and, for example, we will not fire people. So we are clear that's an Asian value that we will pull through. But we're trying to bring this American or Israeli value of innovation as a part of that. And we're trying to build this quality orientation, which is very synonymous with software companies in Australia. We're trying to bring the best of each thing. And that's been my experience, but also the experience of this executive team that I've surrounded myself with.
Okay, great. And given that then, what would be the number one piece of advice you'd give to the startup founders out there that are looking to raise money from investors, that are looking to build sustainable and successful companies? What's the number one thing they should focus on?
So I think first off, part of the answer was in your question. Are you building a sustainable company or not? So some people are happy to just build an asset which they'll flip, make a little bit of money. Nothing wrong with it. I'm not criticizing them, but I think you got to be clear. Are you trying to do that or are you trying to build a sustainable company? you're trying to build a sustainable company, my advice would always be the same. Focus on your team first and foremost. You cannot do it by yourself. I don't care how bright you are or how hardworking you are. It is just not possible for you to attain any dream worth mentioning by yourself. So you're going to have to surround yourself with people. And this part's a little harder. You're going to have to surround yourself with people who look nothing like you. I'm not talking about diversity in terms of race and gender. I'm talking about diversity of thought. Do they have the ability to think in different ways? Now, this is much, much harder to manage. It's much easier for me to manage people who look and think like me. So even if I take the look aside, if they think like me, it's still easy. But if I put this bar much higher, which is diversity of thought, that makes my life a lot tougher. But the benefit of that is at times like this, in the COVID year, I'm naturally aggressive, for example, but I have a CFO and I have a couple of other executives who are naturally conservative. We are the checks and balances on each other. And, you know, one side makes sure that the company is secure and is okay. And the other side makes sure that the company is thriving and is moving forward. And both sides respect each other. So can you build a team that actually does that? So if you have a sense of purpose, you're going to build sustainable. If you can build this team, the third thing I would say is you got to have a clear purpose, and that needs to come from you. Only one person can provide that. And the entrepreneur, founder, or CEO, whoever it is, needs to have very clear purpose. If I come and wake up one of your directs in the middle of the night, they should use the exact words that you have chosen to describe what this company is busy doing.
Excellent.
Not paraphrase. They got to use the exact words. That's when you know it's working.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Listen, everyone out there, we've only got 10 minutes left. So if you do have any questions for Hari, please submit them now. It's now or never. So I'd also like to just abuse my position for a second and take the opportunity to ask you about the goals of C-suite just for a minute, because you know, we want to help managers become better leaders, to help leaders become better managers, and to help progressive professionals further their careers. To enable that, as well as encouraging leadership training and continued learning, we are also pushing the merits of mentoring heavily. And as someone who's had a mentor for a number of years myself, you know, I can't say enough great things about mentoring. So I just wondered, what do you mentor anyone yourself, and have you been mentored over the years?
I do mentor a few individuals. In the past, it was much larger. And I think what's interesting is I've mentored people within the company and mentored people outside the company. A fun example was an instance where I mentored an individual who was in a different business and then ended up actually becoming his manager when we both left to join Property Guru. So I was at LinkedIn, he was at another company, and we ended up working together for many years at Property Guru. But I think mentoring is, I think, a very powerful relationship. I think mentors can tell you stuff that your manager can't. Mentors can tell you stuff that in some cases that your spouse can't. And I think that's a powerful relationship if done right. I don't know about you, everyone's got their own flavor of this. I learned this from one of my mentors, which was to make it a time-bound firm arrangement. So what we did is, what he did with me was, it was a 6-month relationship where once a month we would talk for 2 hours, once a month only. And at the end of the 6 months, we cut the cord. For 1 quarter, no access to him. And after that, it was just ad hoc. I could reach out to him when I needed to, but there was no standing relationship. Now, he was very regimented about it. But I learned something that was interesting, because one, if it's time bound, there's a sort of a mutual respect, understanding that, okay, this is going to actually lapse at some point. So I better show up, you know, for this to work. And I think that mutual respect is actually fairly critical. The second is, I actually believe mentorship beyond a point can become a crutch. The mentee needs to be able to walk or fly on their own. And so you need to let them go. And I think that's what I learned from that mentor. And I use this quite often now. It's time bound. I don't do the 3-month cool off period at the end, but I do make it a time bound thing. But I try and also be honest. A lot of people do approach me for mentorship, and I am maniacal about my time. And if I do not have the time, like right now, I don't. Literally this week, today, I shouldn't say this week, it's only Monday. But this morning, I turned down 2 people who requested mentorship. I said, I'll catch up for a coffee, but I'm sorry, I just do not have the bandwidth to sit and mentor you. So I think that's also an important thing, to show respect to the mentee.
Yeah, it's best to be honest, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. And you have an MBA from INSEAD, as I mentioned earlier. So how valuable then is formal management or leadership training to executives that are looking to become better?
See, I think learning is important. Learning is very critical. I think what the MBA did is it's a structured form of learning. So, and I think not that I want to be a sort of salesman for INSEAD, but I think what I liked about INSEAD was it was an older class. I mean, the average age for the full-time MBA is about 5 or 6 years older than the people who go into Harvard or Stanford, etc. And therefore, you have a lot of people who are already pretty well into their career. And so when we're in the class and we're having these debates, you had people who are my classmates who had as much knowledge, if not more, than the professors on certain topics. And so the debates became that much more vibrant. But I think going back to your question, I think continued learning is critical. Going back to my point on life expectancy, if we are going to actually work until we are 70 instead of 60, you've got to keep learning and innovating. By the time you're 70, I guarantee you, we will not be talking about the companies we're talking about today. So we will be talking about different industries. We have no idea what direction it's going. Are you going to pick up those new skills? I was trained as a networking engineer to build routers and switches and all of that. I couldn't do it today if I needed to, because I've continued to evolve and grow, but I've left parts of me behind. I mean, because I am also, the brain is a little bit, it evolves and it grows, but you need to also shed some of your past to continue to thrive and move forward.
That's part of the journey, isn't it? Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Okay, we're going to go to the audience before the final question. We're going to go to the audience one last time with our final poll question, which should be coming up on your screens any second now. The question is, what is the most valuable way to upskill as a leader? And the options are MBA, leadership training, get a mentor, work experience, consuming content. So get voting, people. Let's see what you think. Okay, we have a winner roaring into first place at the moment, if it stays that way, with mentoring. Okay, let's end the poll there and bring up the results. So yeah,
wow.
0% have said MBA. Wow, that is surprising. 0% leadership training, 80% mentor, 20% work experience, and 0% consuming content. I think that's the most surprising poll result of the night for me. What do you think, Hari?
It's surprising to me too. I think all I'd say to the audience is don't underestimate the value of structured content. Doesn't have to be an MBA. It could be leadership training, or that if content is well delivered, it could do the purpose as well. And also, to be fair to the mentors out there, don't overestimate what they can do for you. So there's no magic person waiting out there to fix your future. Mentors can be invaluable. They've helped me, and I hopefully have helped a few people. But I think you need to also have some form of structured learning to actually develop certain skill sets. And whether it doesn't have to be an MBA, but I am surprised that there was nothing on leadership trainings or on consuming content, because I would assume those things would be good.
Yeah, me too. Okay, all right. So let's end off now with a final question. And you've kind of answered this in parts already, but I'm interested to see if you have the bandwidth to say anything more. As someone who's made it to the C-suite and has indeed stayed there for many years now, what would your advice be to both the aspirants who want to grow into candidates for the senior roles, and for the incumbents already there who do want to keep evolving and bettering themselves? Are there any gems you can throw out there into the universe to end with tonight, Hari?
Well, I don't know if it's a gem, but I think it definitely has worked for me. And it's sort of the thing that it's my touchstone, what I go back to all the time, which is continuous learning. If when I chose to move on from LinkedIn, I was doing my job as per my manager at the highest level. And for me, ironically, the end came when he actually gave me a performance review and he said, "This is the best you've ever done. You could do that job with your eyes shut." And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this job anymore then, because I need something where I'm still sort of figuring things out. And I think if you have that, and it's hard, let me tell you, like the first year I was a Property Guru, nothing to do with Property Guru, but just the comfort I had at LinkedIn over that 6.5 years that I built that business. And listen, I built it in many ways in my likeness because I was the first employee in Asia. So it was very, very comfortable for me because everyone was someone I'd hired or I'd surrounded myself with. And now I was going to a different place, a different culture, different organization, had to build my own reputation, all that stuff, right? And some of the things we turned around, culture shifts and all that. But I think what it taught me was I went there, I went partly for ego. I wanted to prove to myself that I could take any challenge and build a good leadership, build a strong technology business out of Singapore. That's what I came here for at the time. But I think what I've learned along the way is the learnings I've had, the successes and the failures at Property Guru are things I could not have had at LinkedIn. And by taking the plunge, I put myself in a position where I could learn. And I think some of the skills I've picked up over the last 5 years, and I'm far from done at Property Guru, but even over the last 5 years, what I've picked up have given me sufficient material to power the next 10 years of my career. So I think the attitude has to be, whether you're a current leader or someone who hopes to be a C-suite, you've got to focus on, leadership in the end is a learning skill. It's an evolving skill. It is not a static skill at all. The definition of leadership in the Jack Welch days is completely different to the leadership from Reed Hastings or any of the big gurus of leadership today. So, and I think that's something to think about. You think about the books that our mothers and fathers read versus the books that are being written and read by us today. The leadership philosophies are completely different. And even in the same industries in some cases. You talked about Elon Musk. My dad spent many years in the automotive industry. The people who built automotive industries in the 80s and 70s, etc., had certain leadership philosophies. What does someone like Elon Musk do to that industry when he comes in? I'm not saying he's phenomenal, but he is phenomenal, by the way, as an innovator. But what does he do to the incumbent industry then? How do you as a leader in that industry respond to such a massive force of nature coming at you? And I think that's the question that people need to internalize. And one thing I keep telling the board, we are a native digital business that does not make us immune to disruption. In fact, quite the opposite. I at one point worked for the largest internet company in the world. It basically does not exist today. It was called Yahoo. So I think that, I would not have said that in 15 years that company went to nothing. Yeah. But things happen. And that's the world we live in. So
professional discontent has to be paired with a disruptive mindset, doesn't it, really? I think. Sure. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, on that note, I think we're sadly out of runway, to use a startup term. A big thank you to Hari for giving us so much of your valuable time today. It's been an absolute treat for me and for all those who've tuned in as well, I'm sure. And this will be available on Catch Up People. So once it goes on our YouTube channel and our website, probably sometime tomorrow morning, please do share it with your friends. And if you want to watch any of this again, you'll be able to. So we'll also be announcing next month's Mixer guest in the coming days. To be in the loop on that one, just go to our website, csuite.sg, C-suite with a hyphen, for updates, or follow us on social media. I think you can see the links to our social media channels in the chat box there, so please do follow us. Also, please do drop me an email at dean@csuite.sg if you have any feedback or you would like to indeed suggest future guests for the Leadership Mixer series. We'll be doing one of these every month. I'd be delighted to hear your thoughts, and we'll consider any great people out there. So please do drop me a line on that. But for now, though, all that's left to do is to thank our esteemed guest one last time. So thank you, Hari, and to say goodbye to everyone. So more from us soon. Bye now, everyone, and thank you, Hari.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Have a good evening. Bye now.
Bye.